I say that now because they've got something planned later on for me, apparently. So this may well be the last time that I ever meet anybody, actually. So he's right, I'm a lightweight, but it's only in comparison to this lot. I planned in my head a whole load of things that I was going to say, but actually something that's just been said has really kind of put everything into perspective for me. And it's the idea that somebody can be paid £400,000 a year, and we have to look at how we're going to support a food bank. It's just not right, is it? And it's absolutely outrageous that that can be the case. That in this sort of society, where there is lots of money, even though they say, well, there's no money for HE, there's no money for the National Health Service, there's no money for local government, actually, people can be paid £400,000 a year. And you have to struggle around with, what was it, looking for a pay increase of 1,200 quid, it's just ridiculous. There's something wrong where we're having to scratch around as working people, and there's folk who are doing really, really well, thank you very much. And actually the worst of it all is they're doing better and better every year, and working people can't afford to put bread on the table. Our members up and down the country, in higher education, in local government, in the health service, the community and voluntary sector. We have members in 50,000 workplaces in this country. And I think most of those, the vast majority of those people, are struggling just to keep a roof over their heads. Now, one of the reasons for mentioning St. Patrick's Day was because it's also a time when you kind of remember your heritage a little bit. And you remember people who went before you and what they sacrificed so that we could be here. And one of the things about a meeting like this is that, it's great that we meet, but it's also great that we remember the people who went before us so that we could meet. Because for me, part of our heritage as working people is our history in the trade union movement. Remember, it wasn't so very long ago that a meeting like this would have been outlawed, where police would have come storming in through the door and arrested the lot of us for having the audacity to stand next to each other as working people. It really wasn't that long ago. It wasn't that long ago where certainly the women in this room wouldn't have been allowed to be in this room, because actually you wouldn't be working in higher education. Actually, you wouldn't be part of the trade union movement, really, because the trade union movement started as really too male, and started from those craft industries that were male predominant, and women had to fight for a voice within the trade union movement. Black people had to strike and fight for a voice within the trade union movement, and we're still, all of us, having to do that. And it's about, really, at the end of the day, what makes us trade unionists, what brings us together as trade unionists. So what I want to do is just kind of share a couple of little stories about how I became a trade unionist, first of all, before I get onto some of the other stuff. I remember when I left school at 16, so I managed to get a job pretty well straight away as a labourer on building sites. So left the school on the Friday, started on building sites on the Monday. So on the Saturday, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this is going to be good. First, I've never even had a paper around me, right? So this for me was going to be great. Going to have some money in my pocket, be able to go down the pub, be able to do all that sort of stuff. And then my dad says to me, come in the front room. Obviously, I'm not doing the Jamaican accent, right? But he said, come in the front room. Now, we were brought up in a kind of parlour-type house, the terrace house, so you never went in the front room except for a really serious talk. So, frankly, it was the sex talk, really. But you got took into the front room to have that discussion and be told what you could and you couldn't do, right? So I got called into the front room, and my dad sat me down and he said, in this house, we join a union when we go to work. So I thought, because I'd already had the sex talk before, I thought, well, I'm going to just play my dad up a little bit. So even before I could get the words out of my mouth, you're not listening to me. In this house, we join a trade union. So I'm like, right, don't join the trade union. So went back into the living room. And I'm not so big then, you know, so I'm thinking, God, you know. And then my mum calls me back into the front room. And she said, did your dad have a word with you about joining the union? So I said, yeah, and he didn't have to hit me, right? But he said, yeah, but did he have a word with you about becoming a steward? I ain't joined the bloody union. I ain't started work, right? And they're on about me being like a steward and stuff. So I said, no, he didn't. So my mum didn't hit me. And by the way, I'm not advocating corporal punishment in any kind of way, right? But my mum said, we join a union in this house, but we also become stewards, as my mum was, as my dad was, because that's the right thing to do. That's how you stand up for each other. That's what, and I'm able to tell you those things really clearly because apart from the slap around the head, which kind of got it into me, it was because it was a really important day for me because it told me about the need to stand together. So I started work on the Monday on this building site and I'm there on the building site. I'm the youngest person on the building site and I'm the blackest person on the building site. And by the Tuesday lunchtime, I was the subs collector for the union. Now, think about, this was 1979, not long after Thatcher had been elected, literally weeks after she'd been elected. I'm sorry to use such bad language in polite company, right? So literally weeks after she'd been elected, right? So my job was to go around on the Friday when it was, you know, the proper pay packet in your hand. None of this DOCAS and check-off business. This was in your hand. So my job was to go around on the Friday and collect some union subs off people as the youngest and the blackest person on the building site, climbing up ladders. And in those days, there's none of this, you know, remember you see those signs as you go on past building sites now? You're not allowed on the site without hard hats and viz jackets and all that sort of stuff. Not in those days. Not in those days. So I'm climbing up the ladders and I'm getting abuse thrown at me. You know, stuff that I haven't been called before, and actually stuff that I've only been called recently again, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. And getting tools thrown at me and bricks thrown at me, because the last thing that these folk want to do is to give me their money. So apart from the fact that it was the least successful job that I've ever done in my life in terms of, well, in fact it's the least successful thing I've ever done in my life in my job, right? It actually taught me one thing, that you can't be afraid of anything as a trade unionist, because people get bought in to the propaganda that's around about what trade unions are like. And they say, and they forget that it's about us as working people standing together, because all the propaganda from the media is that it's them over there somewhere, it's them who are trying to do something to you, and it's not about us being with each other and standing next to each other. It doesn't tell us that, but that's what that taught me, is that we have to stand together and we have to try and stick together. The next story is about when after a little while I became a painter and decorator. Don't ask me to do any painting and decorating. The reason I'm a trade union official now is because I was a crap painter and decorator, frankly, right? But I started work with this painting and decorating firm, and do you remember you used to do cash in hand, week in hand stuff, you know, so you work for a week for free, I think it is, basically, and at the end of the week you get your money. So I turned up to get my pay packet, and the boss says to me, that's what you're getting? And I said, well, that's not what you promised me when I started. And he said, well, that's what you're getting. And I said, well, you told me lies. Can't talk to me like that. That's outrageous. You're sacked. And I'm saying, you can't sack me because I'm on strike. There was only me in the union, right? But I'm on strike, right? So I'm there, I'm literally with my homemade placard, standing outside this painting and decorating firm in Warsaw. I went by there recently. It's still there, the bastards, right? They're still there, right? But I was there for 2 weeks with my placard, homemade placard, stood outside this painting and decorating firm. I won that dispute. I won, right? And you know how I won? I won because nobody would cross the picket line of one, right? They would not cross that picket line to deliver paste and paper and paint, and they ran out of paint and paper and paste. And that's how I won that dispute, because people showed solidarity with each other. They didn't cross the picket line, and I actually recruited a couple of people afterwards, but left because it was just like, yeah, sod you basically, I ain't working in this sort of place, right? And I got this brilliant, you remember those DECT music systems that they used to have? I bought one of them with the money that they paid me off with, right? But I won that dispute because people stuck together, and that is the essence of what we're about at the end of the day. Nobody ever gave us anything as working people out of the goodness of their heart. Never, ever been done. The only things that we've ever got is when we've stood together as working people. And it's been hard sometimes, and people have said, you'll never win. It's going to be tough. And there's all of these ridiculous revolutionaries out there who are trying to persuade you to do all these things for their own political reasons. The reason we do it is because nobody has ever given us anything. And the message from me today is that nobody will ever give us anything unless we stand up, get organised and fight for it. Now, I'm never going to say that those things aren't difficult. Never going to say that. Because it is really difficult to persuade people to do stuff. I'm a firm believer in strikes, actually. Firm believer in strikes. But I'm only a firm believer in strikes if you're going to be prepared to close things down. Because I think that's how you win strikes. If people want to go on strike, close the place down. Because that will bring the employer to the table. That will make sure that they stop and listen to what you've got to say. This is one of the best organised branches that I've come across anywhere in the country, I have to say. Anywhere, across any service group, across all of the country. And I spend a lot of time travelling around as the person responsible for organising and recruitment within the union. But not everywhere in this union is as organised as that. And that's the challenge that we've got. We've got 50,000 plus employers where we have members ranging from people with organisations with 2 people up to organisations with a couple of thousand people working there. And that's the kind of difference that we've got across what we would all call public sector, to the private sector, to the community and voluntary sector. We're actually one of the biggest private sector unions in this country. Bet you didn't know that, right? But we are. We're one of the biggest private sector unions in this country. And it's because of privatisation and it's because of outsourcing why that's the case. So the employers aren't stupid. They know that if we get our act together and get organised across those 50,000 plus employers, that they know if we get organised, they're in trouble. They are in really big trouble. So what they do, and it's not just the employers, it's the government, it's politicians as well, is they start setting us against each other. They start saying, well, it's the fault of migrant workers, it's the fault of black people, it's the fault of women for demanding this ridiculous thing called equal pay after all these years, which still haven't got, right? It's the fault of everybody but them. So what they do then is they start saying, well, what we'll do is we'll start setting you against each other. So we'll set black against white. We'll start saying that we'll start creating this whole atmosphere where people feel able to come up to me in the streets and start calling me, as I described it at the higher ed conference the other week, where I live in Oxford, so obviously murder capital of the world, and you've got to be really careful around Oxford, obviously. But somebody drove past me, wound down the window, threw an egg at me and called me the N-word, right? Now, this is going on up and down this country right now. And I don't want to go back to those days that I grew up in Warsaw, where in that front room that I told you about, we used to have to keep a bucket of water by the front door because of the stuff that used to get thrown through the letterbox, dog mess and petrol bombs, right? All those sorts of things. And that is happening again. People are just getting abuse. Now, our members, and however you voted in the referendum, is entirely up to you. But I have to tell you this. The day after the referendum, our members from Central Europe, right, go into work in their hospitals and in other public services and are told sometimes by colleagues, what are you still doing here? I thought we voted to get rid of you lot. And that is not made up. This stuff is going on up and down this country right now. And I say again, if we don't stick together, nobody else is going to stand by us. We will lose everything that people who went before us fought really hard for. That's what we have to remember when we celebrate things, as we will do, like things like St. Patrick's Day, is that there's a whole bunch of people who went before us, who were brave in the face of being told that it's not possible, who were brave and stood up and did stuff, got organised when people said that you can't do it. They stood up and fought for what was right. So I don't just want to be against stuff. I mean, tomorrow I've got the privilege of representing the union down in London, if I survive tonight, that is, at the anti-racist rally down in London tomorrow, because I think it's really important that we're there. And I've got the pleasure of doing that. And one of the things that I'll say there, it's not just good enough to be against racism, as we should. And it's not just good enough to be against sexism and against homophobia and against all the ills of the world. We have to say to people what we stand for. We have to say what it is that we think should be done. And that's what I'm going to be saying tomorrow, because I think we have to have more of that discussion. Dead easy to be against stuff. We're always against stuff. You know, I'm against Birmingham City Football Club. I think they're dreadful, right, because I'm an Aston Villa supporter, right? But it's dead easy to be against stuff, but we have to be clear about what it is we stand for, because when you do think about things like the public services, we can't just say we're against the introduction of private companies coming in as we are. We have to say what it is we actually stand for. And I'm for public services that don't depend on how much money you got in your pocket. I'm for a national health service that depends on your need and not how much money you got in your pocket. And yet you say those things to some people and it's like you're asking the world. And I don't think it is. Do you think that those things are outrageous? Because I think those things are really reasonable. You know, I said to somebody the other day, you know, I think there should be like affordable housing for people. They were like, you know what, we just can't afford that as a society. And I'm like, yeah, but hang on a minute. I did a rally outside of Parliament about the renewal of Trident. MPs were coming outside and telling us what was going on. And they were saying, well, you know, one of the things that was part of that discussion was that we asked how much it's going to cost. And the front bench of the government was like, we don't know. We just think it's important that we do it. Well, here's the thing. Let's just think that it's important that there's public services and that our pensioners don't have to struggle to survive. Here's one thing as well, that our women who were born in the 1950s are having to have this whole thing about their pensions being attacked. How outrageous is that? Exactly, right? It's unacceptable, and we have to raise our voices and join that WASPy campaign, right? It's one of the most important campaigns that's around at the moment because it's bringing all these threads together. It's saying that we stand for what's right. We stand for respect and dignity, not just at work, but in communities as well and throughout people's lives, including in retirement. It's a big, big statement, but we have to go out and argue for this stuff. Otherwise, women born in the 1950s are going to suffer massively. And by the way, while I'm on this thing, you know, what we have is a whole situation here where people plan their working lives. I don't know if you were like me, but right at the beginning of my working life, I kind of thought, right, well, I'll kind of retire when I'm that age. That's what I'll do. You know, you plan it out and you think, whatever happens, that's basically when I'm going to try and retire. 55, it was with me. Obviously, I'm nowhere near 55. Yeah, all right. Right, but you can't do that now. Most workers cannot do that unless you're earning £400,000 a year. You could probably do it then. But our members can't do it because they're doing 2 and 3 jobs to survive. That's the challenge that we really face now. How we can raise our heads and give each other confidence, because that is what's needed to get people to understand the massive challenges that we face. These aren't little things that are taking place now. It's a massive attack on public services. It's a massive attack, I believe, on working class people. And I think we can't put up with this anymore. You know, not while there's food banks that our people are having to rely on to survive, even though they're in work, right? Unacceptable, in my view, where our members are having to struggle around on a pittance, regardless of the service, whether it's higher education, local government, the health service. We have to see ourselves as one union, and that's why it's important that we build our union. We have to build recruitment in our union. But what we also have to do is get people active in our union, doing whatever they want to, but something within the union, because unless we do that, they're going to win. And it's as simple as that. And I don't think we have the option myself. I think what we have to do is just to raise our heads and build our union, build the only organisation that has ever stood up for working people, the trade union movement, with all its warts, with all its difficulties. That's what we've got. We've only ever had each other. And as the great Alice Walker once said, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. There's going to be no saviour. There's a picture of me with Jeremy Corbyn up there and stuff. Right, Jeremy, nobody. Nobody else is going to do this thing for us. It's always down to us. And that's what we have to do again. And I'm really confident that when we do that, we can win. Because when you look back in history, we've done it before. And actually, we wouldn't be sat in this room without the sacrifices and the strength of those people who went before us. Thanks very much for listening. Good luck.